Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and big thanks, as always, to Lit RPG Reads for letting us do this, and shout out to Paul Bello, fine fellow. His article about crafting underwater realms for tabletop RPGs really got the gears turning.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, for sure.
Yeah. It's something that I've tried to pull off a few times in my own campaigns, and I gotta say, it can be tough to get right. Like, I remember this one session where my players were exploring this sunken temple. They were looking for this legendary artifact, the drill. And I thought I had it all planned out perfectly. The layout of the temple, the traps, the whole spooky underwater vibe.
Right.
But I totally underestimated how different underwater combat is compared to fighting on land. On land, it's all about positioning and flanking, getting a tactical advantage. But underwater, it's like everything is in slow motion. Plus, you've got to deal with currents and limited visibility, not to mention the whole running out of air thing.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
It was total chaos. My players were getting tossed around like rag dolls, spells were fizzling out, and the whole encounter turned into this hilarious, sputtering mess.
Sounds like a memorable session, though.
Oh, it was. We all learned a lot that day, and that's actually what I'm so excited to dig into with you today. You've got this amazing talent for creating immersive game worlds, and I can't wait to pick your brain about all the things that go into designing a really believable underwater realm.
Well, I'm happy to share what I've learned. And you're right about underwater settings presenting some unique challenges and opportunities for game masters. It's not just about swapping out orcs for sharks. You really have to think about how the environment itself changes the game.
Absolutely. And Paul's article, Beneath the Waves, really does a fantastic job of breaking down those environmental factors. One thing that he emphasizes is how the underwater world is not just one big thing it's a layered environment, with each depth zone presenting its own unique set of challenges. You've got the sunlit zone near the surface where light still penetrates. That's where you might find vibrant coral reefs and those weird bioluminescent creatures.
Right.
But as you descend deeper into the twilight and midnight zones, the pressure increases, the light fades, and the creatures become even more bizarre and terrifying.
For sure.
Imagine the impact that would have on your players. They can't just allow their usual tactics. They need to adapt to this alien environment.
Exactly. They have to think differently, embrace the strangeness of it all.
That's what makes underwater campaigns so exciting. It's like stepping into a whole new world with its own rules and its own possibilities. And one of the things that really struck me while reading Paul's article was how we would have to rethink city building in an underwater environment. Like, forget about wood and brick. Those materials wouldn't last a minute under the crushing pressure of the deep sea.
No kiddo.
You'd have to get creative with materials. Paul mentions using coral as a building material, which just blew my mind. Can you imagine a city that's constantly growing and adapting, with structures made of living, breathing coral?
That's a really cool concept.
It's like something out of a science fiction novel.
Yeah, it is. Building an underwater city would require a complete shift in our thinking about architecture. It's not just about the materials, it's about the whole design philosophy. You can't have sharp corners and rigid structures in an environment like that. Everything needs to be smooth and flowing, mimicking the shapes of marine life. Imagine spiraled towers, streamlined domes, and buildings that sway gently with the currents. It would be this incredible blend of functionality and organic beauty.
I'm picturing it. It's like this fusion of a coral reef and a futuristic metropolis, all lit by bioluminescent algae and swarming with weird aquatic life. But hold on, how would people even get around in a city like that? Is everyone just swimming everywhere?
Well, not exactly. Think of it more like a three-dimensional network of waterways and tunnels, like these interconnected canals and corridors that act as underwater highways.
Okay, I can see that.
And you wouldn't have separate zones for living, working, and shopping like we do on land. It would be more like multi-use spaces, cleverly designed to maximize efficiency. Like your apartment building might also house a kelp farm and a blacksmith's workshop, all working together in this tight, self-sufficient ecosystem.
Whoa, that's amazing. So it's not just about surviving underwater, it's about thriving. But something just occurred to me. What about air? How would people breathe in a city that's completely submerged?
That is a crucial question, and it's one that Paul addresses in his article. He suggests using these closed systems with advanced filtration to create artificial lungs for the entire city.
Like a giant aquarium.
Exactly, constantly filtering and recycling the water to maintain breathable air. But of course, you can't always rely on technology alone, especially in a fantasy setting. So you'd also need backup systems. Things like magical air pockets or spells that generate breathable air.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. It makes you realize how much we take breathing for granted on land.
Yeah.
But even with the air situation figured out, I'm still wondering how living underwater would change the way people interact and organize themselves. I mean, their whole culture would have to adapt, right?
Absolutely. That's what makes underwater society so fascinating to explore. Think about how their social structures would differ from ours. Family units might be larger and more fluid, maybe even incorporating multiple species. Or symbiotic relationships. And communication would be a whole other challenge. Forget spoken language as we know it. They might have systems based on bioluminescent flashes, or pressure waves, or even telepathic communication.
It's mind-blowing.
It is. And their clothing, their art, their architecture, everything would be influenced by the properties of water and the creatures that live there.
It's way more than just swapping out swords for tridents. You're talking about reimagining every aspect of society, from the way they build their homes to the way they communicate.
Exactly. It's about embracing the alien, the unfamiliar,
Right.
and using it to create a truly unique and memorable experience for your players.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, and I don't want to overwhelm our listeners. So let's take a moment to catch our breath, and then we'll dive even deeper into the specific challenges and opportunities that underwater realms offer for tabletop RPGs. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're ready for more, because we're about to plunge even deeper into the world of underwater realms.
Yeah, and speaking of plunging deeper, we need to talk about the challenges that come with actually living and adventuring in an underwater environment.
Okay, bring it on.
Well, first off, even moving around is a completely different experience. On land, gravity is your main adversary.
Right.
But underwater, it's all about drag. Your players, every action from swinging a sword to casting a spell is going to be affected by the density and pressure of the water.
I can just imagine a fighter trying to charge into battle,
Yeah.
only to find themselves moving in slow motion, with their armor weighing them down like an anchor.
Exactly. Or a wizard trying to cast a fireball and the flames just fizzle out in the water.
Right, you would be like trying to fight in a swimming pool full of jello.
Pretty much. So you have to rethink combat encounters, come up with creative solutions that play to the strengths and weaknesses of the environment.
I like that.
Maybe your warriors rely on tridents and nets instead of swords, or they learn to harness the power of the currents to their advantage.
Makes sense.
And your spellcasters might need to develop entirely new spells that work in harmony with the water. Ooh, that's interesting. Like spells that manipulate the tides, or summon creatures from the depths,
Exactly.
or even create pockets of breathable air.
That's a good one.
And don't even get me started on the possibilities for underwater stealth missions.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other level of tactical thinking.
All right.
And then there are the creatures your players might encounter. We're not just talking sharks and giant squid here.
Oh, no.
Paul's article mentions some truly bizarre and terrifying creatures.
Like what?
Well, he talks about these bioluminescent jellyfish that can stun their prey with electric shocks, and colossal crustaceans that can crush a ship in their claws.
Wow.
And even mythical beings like merfolk and krakens.
Okay, you're really selling me on this. I'm already brainstorming campaign ideas. But before I get too carried away, I have to ask, how do we avoid making the whole thing feel too alien and inaccessible for the players?
That's a great question. It's all about finding the right balance between the familiar and the unfamiliar. Remember, even in an underwater setting, your players are still adventurers, with goals, motivations, and relationships. True.
So while the environment might be alien, the core elements of storytelling should remain the same. You still have heroes, villains, conflicts, and resolutions.
Makes sense. So it's like taking the classic elements of fantasy and giving them an underwater twist.
Exactly.
But how do we ensure that the world feels truly immersive, like it's a living, breathing ecosystem?
One of the best ways to do that is to focus on sensory details. Remember, the underwater world is a symphony of sights, sounds, and sensations.
Right.
Instead of just saying, you see a school of fish, describe the way sunlight filters through the water, creating shimmering patterns on their scales.
Okay, I like that.
Or instead of saying, you hear a whale song, describe the deep, resonant vibrations that seem to travel through your bones.
It's awesome. It's all about painting a picture with words.
Exactly.
And what about the feeling of weightlessness? The pressure building in your ears as you descend, the taste of salt water on your lips.
All of that. Engage all of the senses. Make your players feel like they're truly submerged in this alien world.
I'm starting to feel it myself. Okay, so it's not just about the big set pieces. It's about the little details that bring the world to life.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the political landscape. Because even underwater societies would have their own forms of government, their own laws, their own conflicts, right?
Absolutely. And the political systems that arise in an underwater world would be fascinating to explore. You could have anything from ancient monarchies ruling over vast coral kingdoms to decentralized tribes of nomadic merfolk who follow the currents.
I love it.
And imagine the potential for conflict between different underwater factions, each vying for control of resources, territory, or even access to the surface world.
Oh, man, that's a great point. I'm already imagining a campaign where my players have to navigate the treacherous political waters of a merfolk empire, forging alliances and battling ancient sea monsters along the way.
That sounds epic. And don't forget about the potential for interaction between underwater societies and those on land. Maybe there's an ancient trade route between a coastal kingdom and a hidden merfolk city. Or perhaps a shadowy organization is trying to exploit the resources of the deep sea, leading to conflict with the creatures that call it home.
Okay, my head is spinning with possibilities. But before we get too carried away with the political intrigue, let's bring it back to the individual level. How would living underwater affect people's daily lives, their customs, their beliefs?
That's a great question, and it's one that really gets to the heart of world building. Think about how the environment would shape their values and priorities. Perhaps they have a deep reverence for the ocean, viewing it as a sacred entity. Or maybe they're fiercely pragmatic, constantly aware of the dangers that lurk beneath the waves.
I can see that. I'm picturing rituals and ceremonies that revolve around the tides, festivals that celebrate the bounty of the sea, and stories that warn of the creatures that dwell in the deepest trenches.
Exactly. And their clothing, their food, their art, it would all be influenced by their unique relationship with the ocean.
You know what? I'm officially convinced that underwater realms offer a treasure trove of storytelling potential. But for dungeon masters who are just starting to dip their toes into these waters, what are some key takeaways, some essential ingredients for creating a truly immersive underwater campaign?
I think it boils down to 3 core principles. Embrace the alien, engage the senses, and remember the human element.
I love that. Embrace the alien, engage the senses, and remember the human element. Those are words to live by, both in tabletop RPGs and in life.
Right.
But we've covered a lot of ground today, and I know our listeners are eager to hear your final thoughts on this fascinating topic. So let's wrap things up and give a final nod to Paul Bello, fine fellow, for inspiring this deep dive.
You know, it's amazing when you think about it, how much creative potential there is underwater. We often think of these underwater realms as being exotic, almost alien landscapes, and they definitely can be. But what's really interesting is how these alien elements can enhance the human stories that we can tell.
I see what you mean. It's easy to get lost in the fantastical elements.
Yeah.
You know, the bioluminescent creatures, the coral cities, the water-bending magic. But at the end of the day, what makes any story compelling is the characters and their relationship.
Exactly. It's all about exploring how these fantastical elements affect human experiences. Like, how would living in a near weightless environment change a culture's understanding of the world?
Right.
How would their reliance on artificial light and those pressure-resistant structures influence their art and their architecture?
It makes you realize that world building is so much more than just, drawing a map and putting some monsters on it.
For sure.
It's about creating this living, breathing ecosystem where everything is connected, from the smallest fish to the largest leviathan.
That's it. That interconnectedness, that sense of everything being in constant flux. That's what makes underwater realms so captivating. It reminds us that the world, both above and below the surface, is this web of intricate relationships. This delicate balance that we need to try to understand and protect.
Well said. And I think Paul Bello, fine fellow, deserves a round of applause for reminding us of that in his article. He's given us the tools to build these underwater worlds that are imaginative but also grounded in realism. But before we surface from this deep dive, I want to hear from you, our listeners. Have you ever added underwater elements to your RPG campaigns? What were some of the challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them? Maybe you've got a story about an epic underwater battle, or a clever solution to a tricky environmental puzzle. Whatever your experience is, we want to hear about it. So leave a comment below and tell us about your underwater adventures. And of course, if you're looking for more inspiration, check out Paul Bello's work on Lit RPG Reads. Until next time, happy gaming, and may your adventures be deep and rewarding.